So when I'm at the University of Minnesota now, but advised President Obama, by far the most important thing I've done in life is I ran my sovereign tribe. And yeah, aggressive assertions of sovereignty. Aggressive assertions of sovereignty. Aggressive assertions of sovereignty. We are going to take back what was taken from us. I'm curious about my people's history, about my family's history, about what my ancestors went through. And much like all of you in the room who are Indigenous, we never forget the people that we come from, right? And who paved this way for us to be here now. We carry their struggles in our hearts and in our soul. We carry their hopes and dreams for the generations that came after them, and that wellspring that they carried in them to be resilient, to overcome hardship, and to squeeze away their indigeneity. Leaders in my community, I asked them once, why are we considered elders in my community when we're 52 years old? Why? Why is that? They said, back when we first started being a self-governing tribe in the 70s, we signed up to get elderly nutrition program funding, but the average age of death was 56. 56 years old. Now, you can tell a lot by what people value based on where they put their resources, right? I mean, we can see where they haven't put their resources, and that tells you what they don't value. My tribe, when they first got to be self-governing, guess what their first two hires were? It's so curious. A nutritionist and a fish biologist. They wanted their traditional foods back. They were gonna fight for their treaty rights. They knew that our healthy diet, our traditional way of life, our life ways, was key to their longevity. It went hand in hand with nutrition. What white people don't get, and policymakers don't get, is these things aren't different for us in our communities. We look at wellness in our community so holistically, right? That fish biologist, he complained about water quality because our fish weren't healthy anymore. And then the tribe invested in a water quality manager, got certified as a water quality regulator, and used Western science to fight every jurisdiction around us to keep their water clean. Then they started restoring the fish, restoring the habitat, restoring the wild rice. 50% of our people with diabetes. Raised generations since the reservation system started on commodity foods, and that's what you get. It's genocide by nutrition. That was the reservation system. Fast forward all of those years and all of those really smart investments at a tribal level, marrying all of these things, building out our health system, building culturally competent care, making sure that if a diabetic comes into our clinic because they've got a sinus infection, they still take off their shoes because you're gonna check their feet, because we got tired of losing our elders inch by inch to diabetes. The whole families are brought in to learn nutrition education, not only to prevent those future generations, but to help care for their elders. We invested in that Western style education, and we made it our own by marrying it with our traditional life ways, our spirituality, and our culture. Way back in the day, when they first started the first inpatient treatment program for alcoholism, they knew that culture was the key. reframing our identity and taking back our narrative about what it was to be Anishinaabe and not letting anybody else define it was key to our resilience. We now know language, culture, spirituality is a part of the resiliency that we build in our youth. A healthy identity as an Indigenous person is no longer somebody else's story to tell. Now there's all this interest in our traditional ecological knowledge. We have allies who say, we understand that there's other ways of knowing. Well, we might not tell you, right? We know that our millennia of knowledge that we have built in taking care of each other, taking care of our relatives, the ones that swim, the ones on land, the ones that grow, are all a part of reframing what it means to decolonize ourselves first. Now it's our job to take all of those things and build the systems within our tribal communities, continue to invest in those gardening programs, to restore elk where it's been extirpated, to have bison herds, to understand those planting techniques that we knew and were removed from for years. So through the years, I get to be a tribal leader, I get to do policy making at the federal level, and now I'm bopping around higher ed. The first senior advisor to the president for the University of Minnesota system. I was a tad bit skeptical about that. It's true. I'm a graduate of there. I figure if they were going to use money as a weapon, I was going to learn about it. Because capitalism rules, right? Because I watched them from the outside as a tribal leader and as a tribal citizen, and I saw them do some really crazy stuff. Well, number one, they own a big chunk of my homelands on the Fond du Lac Reservation. They put a forestry center there, and that was used to help the captains of industry understand forestry as a commercial aspect and study it, and they did that from within my homelands. I watched the University of Minnesota trademark an apple. They trademarked an apple. Now, as an Indigenous person, this is the craziest thing to me, right? It's food. I mean, I don't know, they commercialized it, right? I'm still waiting for the checks to come for the Three Sisters planting methods back to Indigenous folks, right? You know, we weren't just frolicking in the woods or on the prairie or in our canyons. We were living with our landscape and learning how to work it so that we could survive. And this is the knowledge you want now and the knowledge that you suppressed us from using for centuries. And it was higher ed, land grant institutions that did it. It was the Cloquet Forestry Center that suppressed burning because they wanted to study the trees and they didn't understand that the trees and the forest needed the fire. They needed the fire in a manageable way for our blueberries, and that was a source of our economy and lifeways. So while they built up the captains of industry, we had to suffer from the loss of our traditional ways. So now I'm within this system, right? It's a fun place to be. And we use these words like decolonizing and indigenizing. It's what's expected. So let me tell you what I think it is and it is not. It is not writing you a land acknowledgement. I will not be a part of your performance art. Should you acknowledge the lands that you were on? Yes. Now tell me the 3 to 5 things you plan to do to make it better for the Indigenous people, the Indigenous scholars, the Indigenous communities that you are making your livelihoods off of. Show me the money. You value money. I know what you value by where you put your money. Land grant institutions got their money from stolen indigenous lands through the Morrill Act. We are making some progress at the University of Minnesota. We announced earlier this year our tuition waiver for the 11 tribes of Minnesota. Oh, it's nice, don't get me wrong, it is not enough. It's a good start. Everybody said it was a good start. I mean, there are some practical sides to advocacy, right? Like, can you afford it? It still is pandemic budgeting, but cracking that door open makes swinging it a little further next time a little easier. The first step is the hardest. And I also see some other higher ed institutions beginning to follow. So this is good. Let it be a national movement, especially in our land grant institutions. Building robust support systems for our Native youth and Native learners that come. They don't all come as right out of high school, right? How many of you were non-traditional learners? A little bit older? How many of you brought kids with you? Yeah, I drug my kid all over campus. You know, I wasn't shooting for the 4.0, I was shooting for the paper. Because the paper is the legitimacy, right, for white people. I always used to tell people, I don't need a 4.0, I just need to be done. And my diploma is gonna be the same color as yours. So just get me through this place. I always tell our kids, you don't have to have it feel like it's your home. Think of it as like a vacation, like an Airbnb, right? You don't know where everything is, and it all doesn't work the way you like it, but you're not gonna be there forever anyway. Res up wherever we go, right? Send us on relocation, we take over whole neighborhoods in those urban areas. Next thing you know, we got a center, you know, and we're having potlucks. And we're having our kids get together, right? We're sharing each other's foods and learning regalia and everybody's ways. I remember being a bouncer for some Dene girls because of all that turquoise at the Chicago powwow. It's like we would just muscle our way. Create that little res on your campus. Find that place where our kids can call home and our learners can call home, where they can just be. One of the hardest things of working in a mainstream institution or mainstream government is just all the explaining you have to do, right? Just always have to be a teacher. Give those folks someplace where they can go where they don't have to explain who they are. In the meantime, developing some online training so people will understand. In order to encourage multidisciplinary ethical research, we know too often research out of higher ed is something done to us rather than with us, and no more. If a tribe doesn't want it, the answer is no. We will exercise free, prior, and informed consent with tribes. We are coming out with the best practices research protocol that will hold up what works with Indian country, how to build those partnerships, how to be respectful, how to work with tribal research boards. The fact that we consider our relatives that aren't human, the wolves, the wild rice, our cultural patrimony, they deserve the same care as human subjects and enjoy the same rights of people. So we'll have that protocol coming out shortly. I cannot and will not ask tribes to fix the institutional racism of the University of Minnesota. Let me repeat that. I cannot and will not ask tribes to fix the institutional racism of the University of Minnesota. I've got to give it to the Shakopee Mdewakanton community. They have been so incredibly generous, so proactive, so incredibly gracious to reach outside of their community and try to influence the way that we look at university tribal relations. They found a winner. We should do it across the entire university system, across every discipline. Shakopee already showed us the way, and now it's time to hold us to account within the rest of the colleges and disciplines within the University of Minnesota. You build it first. You make it valuable to tribes. You ask them what it is they need to promote wellness within their community in that really big balcony way of how they define wellness. Ask them what they need. Partners come with humbleness. Now, I come from a matriarchal society. I got my big auntie earrings on today. We were kinship societies. Women decided who were kin, right? In our communities. And much like those old matriarchal kinship societies and indigenous communities, institutions that are outside of for tribes coming into an institution like the University of Minnesota, they have to come with that same humbleness as my husband did when he came into my family. He went to my mom. He hung out with my dad. Dad was fun. But mom, she calls in all the aunties. It's kind of game over. He came with humbleness, right? And he showed my mom his love. He was allowed to stay, right? Our partners need to come to our communities with that same set of ethics, that same set of values, recognizing what's important to us, and adapt themselves for once for how things work in our communities. Follow our rules. Ask permission. Do no harm. And for God's sake, go home when we tell you. Right? It's like that cousin who moves into the basement and then just doesn't go home. It's time to go home. Time to get your own home. We all have one. It's the thing we share together, right? I got some real cackling going up here. In closing, I want to say, as someone who has endeavored to make a difference in my own community and for Indian country at large, all of this is so important. I remember just kind of the things that kept me up at night as a tribal leader. It really wasn't the politics of being a tribal leader. It was another generation of trauma that got anesthetized by drugs and alcohol. It was another family who didn't find their own wellness and succumbed to violence. It was the confused identities of our young people who hadn't found their way back to our language and our culture, and they haven't found that strength yet. It was the ones who couldn't identify where they fit in this strange world and how to make it work for them so that they could come home, invest in themselves, their own skills, and contribute to that positively to that next generation. The ones that couldn't figure out that the values that we live by in our community. Nobody else decides those for us, and they are not negotiable. So you work in these broader systems, you work at home for wellness, you navigate systems that weren't built for us. You take them systems and you demand more. And if you need to, you call Auntie Karen, I got your back. Thank you all. Thank you.
I always say
That hit zero. I was like, game over, I'm out of here. Um, but to answer your question, I'm a government geek from way back. It's no wonder that I worked for Barack Obama. Once again, kind of like learning money to understand what other folks value. Learning government is about learning their systems and how do we make them work for us. Then raising your diet. We know that our food sources are held by big conglomerates, right? And we don't have enough diversity and access to market and local food sources. That's what all gotta know. What else? I'm a mom, I'm a wife. fun of you, and we will knock each other down a peg. What I will say, the hardest part of doing some of this work is that we are not always in good relation with each other. Indigenous folks were kind of mean to each other. The social media, I will say I take healing and strength when we uplift each other. Don't do the white man's work for them, okay?